Hi, I'm Stacy. Welcome to QoR. Today we're going to take a look at a winter palette and do some swatching out and have a wonderful time mixing some color. We're here in our workshop space in upstate New York. It's been a snowy day and it seems very apropos that we are looking at this palette. I'm joined with our producers and a Materials and Application Specialist here at Golden who can answer your questions in the chat. And if there's anything you'd like me to show you again or answer, our helpers here can let me know. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we were thinking about what might be a fun limited palette to explore given the landscape that we're experiencing here in upstate New York. I know that other parts of the world and our country are possibly having a very different experience right now, but in the northern hemisphere where we do have winter kind of gracing us with its beautiful tonal palette, we are excited to explore some colors that maybe can express themselves in this context. So if we could pan out, thank you so much, Todd. We're going to start with a primary palette pretty much of Quinacridone Red, which is a wonderful transparent stainer. It leans cool, and if you take a look at this little example here, you can get a sense of what that looks like dry. We'll be using yellow ochre, which is a semi-staining, semi-transparent color. Because it is semi-transparent, it's got a little bit of a texture to it there. Not a granulator, but that little bit of opacity adds another sort of dimension to this palette. Nice and warm. And we have our Manganese Blue, which is a great sort of anchor in this palette for those cooler winter tones, and it is a staining color it is a transparent color, misspoke, as well as a granulator, so that adds a wonderful textural element to this palette. We have Burnt Umber, which is also a semi-staining color as well as a granulator, and semi-opaque. It's an unusual combination of characteristics, and this is a wonderful addition as well when we're really thinking about that tonal textural effect that we see in this type of landscape. Okay, so I went ahead and made a color chart, just a simple primary secondary chart to show you how these mix. It's a very muted palette with the exception of this blue, very much like what you may see in a winter landscape or interior space with that cooler light. So we can get a nice violet here as well as a muted orange and a really earthy green. Our burnt umber can be used to neutralize, to bring down some of the intensity of those colors. If you see in here, we just did a quick little pass with some water, blending those two colors together, or three colors together. We have our yellow ochre, our Quinacridone Red, and our Manganese Blue with the burnt umber here to just show you how they neutralize. We start to get into a greenish gray, not a pure neutral, but something that could be used in that sort of gray range when we need to go towards black over here with the manganese and the burnt umber. And I'll show you some examples of creating neutrals for this palette because as I look out our window here, I do see hints of violet and hints of green and hints of red, but everything is very tonal right now. We actually had snow this morning, so this is definitely on time. And at the end, I'll show you how we can add a little sparkle. It's fun to think about how light reflects off of the snow. And let me see if I can get the light here at the right angle. I think we're a little washed out on this one, but I'll show you later on a better card that has a little bit of contrast, how that iridescent pearl, which is also a granulating color, it'll add some texture, when mixed with your color can really start to mimic some of the little glints of light that you'll see in a winter landscape. So let's have some fun mixing. This is the best part. Okay. All right, so before I really get into this, are there any questions?
No, we have one question
about
the palette we're using, and so our Materials and Application Specialist is going to put those colors in the comments.
Oh, awesome. So let me go ahead and go through them again. We have, the sort of fun piece that's really not something we're going to be mixing with, but we will do a little glazing with the Iridescent Pearl Fine. That's just our little sparkle. But we have for our mixing palette the Yellow Ochre Natural, our Manganese Blue, Quinacridone Red, and for neutralizing and for where we might need those warmer brown tones, a Burnt Umber. So that's the limited palette we'll be working with. Mostly a primary, close to a primary palette here. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get going. This is an example of from my backyard last year. We haven't had that much snow up here quite yet. We had just a little bit last couple days. This is from, I think, last January. It was a beautiful sunny day, but it was just still, you can see a lot of snow out there. It's very tonal, but that blue color just absolutely sings. Manganese blue is just so close to that color on its own, right out of the tube, that you could very easily just tweak this a little bit with some of that cool Quinacridone Red to get something that might lean a little bit more violet, like you might need in some areas like this. Then when you look at the clouds, there's a bit of a graying and a violet tone to the underside of these clouds where they're loaded with moisture. So what I did here is I just took a tiny bit of that burnt umber and mixed it with the blue. So I'm going to show you that swatch out really quickly here wet, just to give you a sense of the movement of this paint. All right, so let's take this manganese, we'll load up the brush. Here we go. And I'm just going to do a really simple, whoops, just sort of brush out here. Right, let's add some water to that to get a sense of that undertone. And a wash. You can see the movement of that paint. Really beautiful. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of a neutral mix with the burnt umber. So I'm just going to do this right on the paper. Okay, so this is what it looks like full saturation. I'm going to take just a tiny bit of the burnt umber on my brush. Of course, I can do this in my palette. And neutralize this down. It'll lean a little green. You can see that's pretty intense. I'm going to take a lot more blue into that mixture, and then I'm going to pull it out with some water so you can see what that looks like. There we go. This is a little greener than my mixture I had before. What I could do is I could adjust that with just the tiniest bit of the Quinacridone Red. Cool this down a little bit. Make it a little leaning towards a little bit more towards violet. You can see that color coming up right here. Take this in here. There we go. And just by neutralizing and adjusting, you'll get those subtle changes in color. You know, a winter palette can be quite subtle, but it is colorful. The more you look, you start to see, okay, wait, that's not green, that's violet. And I see red in my brown, and I see green in my brown, and so on. So I've just gotten to a color that I could actually see a little bit in the shadows down here in the snow, and also the bottom side of those clouds. Here we go. In here, just by neutralizing that blue, adding a little bit of the brown, and then adding a little red so it starts to lean more towards violet than green. Okay, wonderful. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so this is a picture from one of our producers today, Allison. And I mean, I just love the way, these are lemons. Is that correct?
Oranges.
Oranges. Oh, so here we got a little camera play on colors. So we have, they're reading like really like this yellow ochre right out of the tube almost. I mean, I would just need to neutralize it a little bit. And that snow is just, you know, it's so cool coming through that window at that time of day. It's really so close to that blue right out of the tube. So when I look at these oranges, I really feel like I could start with this yellow ochre, and I would probably just want to tweak it and play with it just a little bit to bring down the intensity of that color. So what I did on this swatch is I actually just brought in the brown right into the to the yellow, and you can see that that would work in some instances. And then I would sneak in a little bit of the manganese blue to you know, create some other neutral tones, which leans, you know, a little bit towards that greener side, which I can see in some of the rind in here and maybe some of the more muted areas. So I'm going to do that swatch out with you here so you can see the difference between wet and dry. But that manganese is just so close. Look at that. And we'll get into some dark neutrals in a moment. With this actual mix out. Okay, so let's do this one first. All right, so very quickly I'm going to go ahead and pick up some of this beautiful yellow ochre. Again, this is a semi-opaque, so you know we'll get some of that coverage, but I actually want to let that down a little bit in a moment, just so you can see what that paint looks like. Sorry, I have fuzz on my brush. There we go. So you can really see that undertone. It's just so warm, so pretty. But we want it to be a little less warm for these oranges. So I'm going to pick up a little of the burnt umber. I want to make this a little less intense. But still, that burnt umber is really warm. So I'm going to cool it down with some of the manganese blue. So there we go. All right. You can see the texture in that brown as well as I'm painting this out. And on the dry sample too. I mean, you have a couple of granulators in there doing their thing. All right, so here's some manganese blue. Just going to swatch this out over. You see that incredibly intense, bright, cool blue, and I'm going to just pull that right into this mixture, and you'll see it start to neutralize. Get that grayish, greenish kind of tone. Right? And I've really put a lot of water into this so that you could see something of a similar value as the dry example, but just know that this will dry lighter. So you might have to lean a little darker when you do your mixes than what I'm doing right here. But you can start to see those textures even in the wet space, and here in the dry example, they're very evident, which is a lovely tool in building your painting. So. Okay, so that's that. Now I want to talk about creating some neutrals. There's a few ways with this palette to create some really darker neutrals. And given the context of this landscape being in the winter, you do see a lot of that, of these darker neutrals. So let's mix some. There's a few different approaches. I could do a primary mixture to create a almost black. And that's what I'm going to start with first. I'm going to take the yellow ochre and mix it with the Quinacridone Red and then pull in the manganese blue. I'm not going to get a true black. The pigments that I'm working with will not go all the way to black. This is going to look more like a dark gray. But it'll be a really decent neutral gray if I get my mixture right. There we go. So as you see, I'm mixing here. I can warm this up, I can cool this down, I can have this lean whatever direction I need to create all of these different darker tones in my painting. But that primary mixture should, when it hits the paper, be quite dark. That's leaning a little violet. So if I wanted to, I could come in and warm this up a tiny bit. Still a little violet. Okay. Here we go. And now I'm going to pull this out just so you can see the undertone. And of course, you can just keep adjusting. You know, I worked with the professor years ago who talked about the beauty of mud and the importance of mud. And it's true, when you're building a really, when you're building a palette of color that is very muted, like a winter landscape, and you really need those few chromatic moments to sing, your mud sets it up. So by having these beautiful neutrals to work with, you're able to set up the intensity of this blue and this yellow. Now you see this color right here, I could use right here for my rind. It's very, very close. Okay. Another way we can create neutrals in this palette is by utilizing the burnt umber We can create a range of neutrals that go from a sort of greenish color that is a little bit cooler to a violet. But both are going to read in the gray family. So I'm going to go ahead and mix that for you now too. Okay. So I have my Manganese Blue and I have my Quinacridone Red, and as you can see on my dish, it just goes right away to violet. It's beautiful, right? I can have a red violet, a blue violet. I can balance that however I want. So you can see that's purple right there, right? Classic purple. Now, if I start to pull this burnt umber in, it's going to start to neutralize that color. So the first one I'm going to swatch out is going to be pretty much primarily the Manganese Blue and the burnt umber with just a tiny bit of red. I'm almost to black there. Isn't that amazing? Right? I'll add some water to these colors so you can see them in a wash. Now I could also go to that same dish and drag my mixture more towards the red end and bring in a little bit more of the blue and the red, a little less of the brown, and I'm going to have a different mixture. I can do the same thing by having a bit more of the blue in that mixture. Okay, and I get a variety of neutrals. Now I'm going to add some water to show you what these look like. So these are chromatic neutrals. This is quite gray. Okay, here's another. This is the one that has a little bit more red in it. You can see that violet undertone in that neutral when I pull it out there. And this is the one that has a little bit more blue in it. It's just a little cooler. So when I'm dealing with a close together palette of neutrals where I have, I can see dimension in these trees, having a variety of neutrals to work with and a variety of textures is very beneficial. Are there any questions before we move on to the next group of swatches?
There's one question about the paper you're using.
Oh, yes. I believe this is our Hahnemühle, and I don't have the pad with me to tell you the exact, but we can put it in the comments after the event.
We'll follow up after the event and put the paper in the comments.
Yep.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This is similar. This is a barn that's on my property that's kind of, a relic of the past. We love it. We feel like it's a sculpture, and unfortunately, it's structurally not sound. But I love it, and I take a lot of pictures of it. So on this, you can see we've talked about a lot of the colors in this photograph already. But I just wanted to show you, if I took one of the neutrals I just mixed, this middle range here, and maybe a little bit more blue than that one, and mixed it with my yellow ochre, I end up with a neutral that actually runs the range of this wood in this barn. That's a funny little weird color to get. It's got a little yellow, it's got a little blue, but it's so subtle. But you can get there by neutralizing these colors. Right here in this part of the barn, I see this part of the swatch. Over here where it's got a little bit of a glint of yellow, I can see from this part of the swatch in here. It's all there. Yeah. So down here, I have just the yellow with the brown. You can see how that's a bit more chromatic, a bit more intense. Just bringing in those opposing colors from the color wheel. Something that's a little bit of a violet into that yellow will get you to that neutral. Okay. Great. Let's keep going. This is fun. Now we're going to have some exploding color. Look at this. Wow. This is Allison, who's here with us today. This is one of her photographs, and I just thought, this is incredible. So how fun is this? I'm going to go ahead and do some painting with this one. Beautiful sunsets in the winter up here. And this is a cornfield that has been cut down for the winter, and you can see all the little spikes sticking out. It's beautiful. but what's interesting is how the snow reflects the sky. It's a little different than, say, water or sand or, you know, any other time of year. You have this white color or very light gray on the ground, just hitting that, absorbing that beautiful warmth at the top, and it's just an interesting color situation. So to get the sky, I went ahead and just mixed the yellow ochre and the Quinacridone Red because it's just so intense. And if I'm using this limited palette, I want to get as much intensity out of these colors as I can. I don't want to neutralize them at this point. I just want to go for it. And then I'll work in some of those more neutralized violets that you see within the sky and on the ground. So let me grab this red. Doing this a little differently. When I bring this red across here, okay, you start to see how it mixes into that orange. I can really get an orange that will, in my painting, appear quite bright. I'm never going to get to that orange with this palette. I'll get close though. If I set up my neutrals right, it'll create a color relationship that makes it feel hot like that. Okay? Now, this color here, I go back to that neutral palette that I was just showing you with the here it is, lost my palette, with the burnt umber and the manganese blue and the quinacridone red. And again, it's about finding that balance between the colors. So I'm just going to take I know it's very violet, I can see that here. I'm going to take my brush into the red first, pick up a little bit of that blue, and just touch it here. It's got the burnt umber in there as well, because my palette's kind of a little messy now. Now I'm going to pull a little bit more of the burnt umber in to try to neutralize this. There we go, and I'm pretty close now. Let me just drag this out. There we go. So you can see that I'm pretty close in that swatch to what I had here. So I can get all of these tones in here. Now if there's some spots where I feel like there just is a little hint of yellow from that sky, I can go ahead and pull that in, or I can glaze this color by taking once this is dry, a very thin wash or very dilute wash of that yellow, just to sort of hit it with just a tiny bit of the warmth that I'm getting from the sky. Okay, great. All right, next one.
So Stacey, while you're getting set up, I do want to let viewers know that if you were not able to stay for the whole presentation, that this is recorded and will be available to watch at the completion of the event today. You can find it right here on our Facebook page.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Absolutely, yes. All right, so here's the swatch outs I did of those neutrals. You can see in the very dilute washes, which has very little pigment because it was mostly water, that those pigments start to sort of separate and do some interesting things. Remember, we have two granulating colors in that mixture with the manganese blue and the quinacridone red and the burnt umber, and you really start to see that texture where you add a lot of water. Here's some dried examples of some dilutions with of those neutrals that we mixed. What's really interesting about that is how when you start to play with the different elements in your landscape, you can create an almost tactile sensation of texture using those kind of granulating colors. So we have an example here of a winter night landscape. Looks pretty simple, but looks are deceiving. If you take a look at this image, we have our moonlight coming down here, right? And then we have the sky, which is the sort of, you can tell that the sky in all of its sort of dark tones is much bluer than the snow down here, which kind of reads more generally as warmer. I would think that when I'm making these neutrals, I'm going to lean a little bit more towards my quinacridone red, and up here a bit more towards that manganese blue. When I get into these areas, I'm just going to have to, yep, there you go, have to play with those neutrals, but they can be achieved. It's all there. The reason I bring this dark one up is not only to show you how some of these neutrals could be utilized. This is very very close to that in these spaces, but also to show you a fun little trick using the iridescence. So I have sparkly snow down here, and I might just want to very subtly add a little pop to the painting, especially something this dark. So I'm going to play around with some iridescent glazes. First, though, before I do that, I just want to show you what the iridescent looks like if I mixed it with a color. So I have a piece of black watercolor paper here. I'm using the black because it will really show up beautifully on camera. First, I'm just going to swatch out the iridescent by itself. This is iridescent pearl. It is a granulating color, and it's very visibly granulating on this black paper. So let me pull this out here. I'm going to do a dilution with that and just wash it across the paper so you can really see that texture moving. You can even see the little pieces of mica when I move my brush. It's pretty exciting stuff. Really lovely, but a lot of times we get the question, how do I use this in my painting if I'm not into like having something so obviously glittery? And I'll show you how to sort of sneak it in there in a more subtle way in a moment. But here's an example of that iridescent paint dry. Look how shiny that is. Right? So in pure strength, it's intense. It's going to be really beautiful. But you may not want that intensity. So here I've got that iridescent under a neutral, sort of leaning slightly towards blue glaze. So what I did is once this layer was dry, I took a neutral color that was leaning a little bit towards the cool side, and I just diluted it and glazed over that. So you can see that that starts to make it a little less intense. It's more of like a whisper. Over here, I actually mixed it with color. When you mix the iridescence with color, the pearl, being that it's kind of a white, will just kind of act as a tint. It'll make it like a light shiny blue instead of just blue. And this is the manganese with the iridescent pearl, and this is the Quinacridone Red with the iridescent pearl. Right, so it acts a little bit like a tint. If you had the iridescent gold, it would actually, the yellow would be, you know, kind of make your colors a little warmer, and so on. In this case, though, I don't really want to alter the color a whole lot. I just want to make it shiny. So what I'm going to do is a glaze. I'm going to use, let's see, I think I'll go ahead and use these, I guess. What I'll do is I'll start by diluting this iridescent pearl quite a bit and loading my brush with that color. And then I'm going to just, without rubbing a bunch of times, just going to layer it one time over this. There you go. So as that dries, what you'll be left with is just your color, except it's going to have a little bit of a shine to it. It's not going to be, you know, crazy shiny like it was on the black. It'll just have a little bit of that glimmer, which can be really lovely in a situation like this, if you're painting a snowy landscape. Okay, I think we covered it. Are there any questions before we wrap today?
I think everything's been answered in the comments, but you are always welcome to email us your questions.
That's right.
At
So
help@goldenpaints.com, and we'll put our contact information in the comments as well.
Awesome. There you go. All right, so thank you so much for joining us. I hope that was fun. We really enjoy doing these things. And as I look out the window right now, the snow has returned. And I feel like as I look down at my table, we've done a pretty good job at matching what we're seeing out the window today. All right, have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves. If you're in the north, stay warm. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you soon.